And welcome back. So now we've talked about oscillators and filters, envelopes, LFO, performers, stepper, all the different modulation sources. Now it's time to get into some of the advanced controls in what are called the general pages. The general pages are located in the center window, and it's this top row of tabs here. You'll see oscillator, key track oscillator, key track and filter, voicing, routing, and global. So we're going to move through these one at a time. In this lecture, we'll talk about the oscillator page. Here we're going to be dealing mostly with the just sort of some global controls that control all of the oscillators and the pitch and the phase and things like that. So on the far left, you'll see there's a glide section. And we have these two traversal modes, equal and rate. When equal is selected, every glide occurs over the same length of time. The time in between gliding between notes is the same no matter how much of an interval it is between the pitches. However, in the rate mode, the glide time it depends on that interval between the notes. So, for example, if there's two notes and the pitch is close together, it will be a shorter glide time because it just takes less time to get in between the two when rate is selected. When equal is selected, it's equal no matter what. And so you can adjust what that time is by using this knob here. Now, if you notice, if I play two notes like this, it's not going to glide in between them because I'm not in monophonic mode. So we need to go to the voicing tab and choose monophonic here. We'll get into more of what happens in this voicing page later on, but now you can hear. There's a slight glide. We can increase that a little bit. So, okay, that's the glide function, and you can select whichever traversal mode you want. Over here near the right-hand side of the oscillator page, we have a vibrato block. And vibrato we talked about when we used the LFO to control, to modulate the pitch here in oscillator 1, but there's also this global vibrato control that you can use. So right by default, these knobs are controlled by macro control number 1, which is at the bottom. So I can play a note, and I can increase my vibrato macro control here. And you can hear that vibrato come in. Now the range here is pretty small, so the depth, you have the depth of the vibrato, which is how far up and down in the pitch the vibrato will go, and you can increase that if you want. Like that. And also the rate, you can increase the range here. You can also just unassign these and just create your own vibrato here by adjusting these parameters. And just as with the LFO, you can select this mono button at the top, which will force all MIDI information to jump in and sync up in the same vibrato course, rather than initializing itself when a new MIDI note is triggered. The pitch bend block over here communicates with your MIDI keyboard's pitch bend wheel. So if you've ever used a MIDI keyboard's pitch bend wheel, when you drop it down, it usually goes 2 semitones or a whole step up and down from the center. But you can change that. You can have it not go up at all, but when you pull it down, you can drop it down all the way down to 2 octaves so that you can create sort of an extreme pitch drop with that pitch bend wheel. So you can have some fun with that. Now, in the far right-hand side, I know we're skipping around here. In the far right-hand side, we have the internal envelope, just like we have in the LFO section, in which you can modulate certain parameters here internally with this attack and decay envelope. So you can just click this handle and you can drop it into the rate knob, for example, and create your little range. And that way, when you play a note, you can set up your vibrato to occur after you've played the note, sort of like this. I'm going to drop it in the depth as well. So you can hear it starts off with very little vibrato, or no vibrato rather, and then it sort of swells into a nice vibrato. Like that. So you can use this internal envelope to control certain parameters in here. Okay, now let's talk about this phase block in the middle. You'll see it's titled Oscillator Phases. This allows you to control the relative phase of each oscillator, and additionally the modulation oscillator. And you can do so by selecting this Restart via Gate button over here. Now these are eliminated, and you can drag these sliders over to create different relative phases for each oscillator. And so once again, this Restart via Gate button means that each time you hit a note, the oscillator will start at the beginning of its phase. If it is deselected, then the oscillator starts at the point in its phase that it is already at. When you're playing a note and you hit another note, it jumps in at that current phase. And so what is the phase exactly? Well, if you remember, let's look at, for example, the low frequency oscillator. Is an oscillator just like the normal oscillators are, and this happens to be a sine wave. And the phase is the x-axis here. So where on the x-axis the oscillator is traveling in its sort of bipolar course. So you can have each oscillator start, here at the beginning or in the middle when it crosses through and is on its way down. In the oscillator page, you can assign each oscillator to start at a different phase. And you have this numerical value at the top to indicate that. These are the degrees: 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180, 270, and 360. And so remember, each oscillators just have a cycle, and then when they get to the end, they start back again at the beginning. So what does that sound like? Well, if we activate all 3 oscillators, let's bring this back to the beginning. And let's make sure that they are all saw waves with the same parameters. So now if I play all 3 oscillators at the same time, it's just sort of a fat sound. Because they all have the same phase, and it's just louder. If I make subtle differences to the phase, you can hear some difference in the character of the wave. So that's just a sort of an interesting way to layer your sounds and get some different harmonic response from your different oscillators. Alright, so that's the oscillator page. Nothing too crazy, but it's good to know what these parameters do. And now in the next lecture, we'll move on to the key tracking oscillator page.